Hola, estamos en la COP25 con Su Excelencia el señor Tijani Mohamed Bande, presidente de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. It is our pleasure to have you in Amaranta TV. As you may be aware, Amaranta TV has a channel on governance in collaboration with the Institute for Knowledge, Governance and Global Development, an area which has been your responsibility and passion for many years, both in Nigeria and abroad, but especially of the last years in the United Nations. The UN is often recognized as the most important governing innovation since the Westphalia Treaties. In which sense you think the UN is one of the crucial governance mechanisms of the world?
Well, I think you have answered the question. I think in the history of politics, I think the creation of the United Nations must be one of the most important moments. The very idea of having not a world government, but a framework allowing all governments, recognized governments, to pull together to deal with common issues, I think is a major achievement. Of course, it has taken over from earlier efforts. Certainly the League of Nations was an effort, and the events post that brought about the Second World War necessitated the creation of the United Nations, and I think it's a major framework for governance around the world. So, yes, it is the most important. It has also been the most enduring and also the most, I think, extensive in terms of what it does, relation to governance, relations to rights, relations to development, relations to peace and security, I think.
In reference to this, could you explain why some have made the claim that the UN has prevented a third world war?
Well, I think if you take a look at even the development of technology of war that are connected more globally or more generally to the whole question of innovation and creation of new things, both for war and peace, that countries are able to produce more weapons of war. Yet they are constrained, even when they have dispute with others, and as to how they fight and the extent to which this happens. I think the fact that there is a body that has legal authority, frankly, to intervene if countries go outside the clear norms has not prevented wars between neighbors, but large-scale war has not happened since 1945. I think it's an achievement. I mean, you cannot directly say, well, it is only because of the United Nations, but I think it's difficult to explain the absence of mass war outside the fact that the United Nations does exist as a moral force and also as a legal force, frankly.
Thank you. The UN embodies the principle of collective security. In its origin, the notion of collective security entailed an agreement among states for two areas. They would never use war in their relations, and they would commit to consider any member's aggression as a collective aggression, and so they would respond collectively towards the aggression. How has the system of collective security changed over the years, and what is needed to make it more effective?
Well, I think the first element is the key one. The United Nations is well known for its aversion to war and the idea that conflicts are natural in human interactions, but that violent conflicts must be avoided and that dialogue should be privileged over other means of settling disputes. So force as an element of relations, I think, is downplayed as something that we should avoid. Now, the notion of collective security is also a collective commitment to the avoidance of mass war, to the avoidance of really violent conflicts. And the idea that we have organs within the United Nations, the Security Council, for example, that are given clear powers to deal expeditiously with aggression outside the normal approaches to relations, I think shows collective security has largely worked. And I think that is the point.
How has been your experience thus far in leading the General Assembly of the United Nations?
I think for me it's very important. I mean, the idea is simply that there is large-scale cooperation among nations, even if, as we understand, nations have different histories and capacities and traditions. But still, there is camaraderie among representatives, and countries appreciate that they do need each other to make any headway in their own development and in relation to their own efforts. National interest is understood as legitimate, but that national interest does not mean permanently conflict with the interests of others. I think that idea of a forum is alive and well. Yet, of course, there are some worries concerning occasional weakening of commitments, relation to agreements, and also some tendency of certain nations, especially relating to nuclear proliferation, to make light of this. I think the world community is worried over any effort to weaken the regime of arms control and non-proliferation. I think that is a worry. But important as it is, there is a strong framework to talk to members in a collective body that the United Nations is. So, in summary, there are a few worries concerning some direction, but they do not mean that it doesn't mean that we have failed as a community to rein in, to bring people on board that yes, we should avoid violent conflict and we should cooperate more to avoid war, especially nuclear and related war.
As you have mentioned, the General Assembly is considered the most democratic organism of the United Nations, yet its resolutions are not binding, and it does not have competence over issues of peace and security. This competence belongs to the Security Council. How do you think you can deal with this difficulty, and what could be a realistic path to resolve it?
Well, I think let's not put the Security Council in oppositional terms with the General Assembly. The Security Council is Security Council of the United Nations. General Assembly is General Assembly of the United Nations. We are dealing with what things are mandated. It doesn't say the General Assembly has no responsibility for peace and security. It says primary responsibility for peace and security lie with the Security Council. It is smaller, it can take decisions faster, but it's also an arm of the United Nations. It is not a body separate from the United Nations. And the General Assembly has the moral force that is very well understood in terms of the rules and in terms of certain of the norms. And in extreme situations where the Council is unable to take action, the General Assembly can take decisions, but it's not something that should happen often, so that we do not have a conflict in terms of the mandates of the two bodies. They are separate, but they are separate only for them to work better for the United Nations as a system, because there are several other bodies that also have responsibility. The Economic and Social Council has responsibility, the General Assembly has responsibility, the Security Council has responsibility. They have to work together, because none is really separate by itself, but connected to a system called the United Nations.
The General Assembly deals with multiple vital issues for the well-being of humanity, as climate change, human rights, development, children, culture. Although the question might seem a little bit ambitious, how do you assess its performance in these areas in general?
Well, I think you talk of all the issues of importance around the world, and you see that the General Assembly has accompanied every major development. You are talking of convention to protect the rights of children, discussions of this, and rights of minorities, right to education, the whole question of right to development, the whole question of the SDGs. SDGs are things already agreed to under the auspices of the General Assembly as elements, as an overarching understanding that all countries need peace and development, and that each country can do better than it is doing. So whether you are dealing with migration, a big issue, whether you are dealing with health issues, we have now universal health coverage. These are things that happen because the assembly in which people talk, in which people say, well, this is important for us, it's also important for you, why not we agree to this? And I think talk about issues of education, talk about issues of health, talk about issues of rights, every element of relationship to oceans, to the climate, you see that the assembly is part of the discussion. And so whatever it is you talk about, the General Assembly of the United Nations does have a role, and it has a role also in conjunction with other bodies in the United Nations system, which is important because there is one body called the United Nations, and each of the sub-units within the body needs to pull together in terms of peace, in terms of rights, in terms of development.
Beyond your current duties at the General Assembly, you are a recognized expert in the area of governance. Indeed, you have contributed to multilateral organizations in Africa. You have led universities in the areas of governance and political science, and you have been granted honors in these areas internationally. Ideally, what do you think could be the best arrangement for the effective governance of the world?
Well, I don't think that I can talk of ideals, but what we do have is really to respect the principle that individuals can see things differently without really demonizing others who have different views, and that sensitivity to the rights and needs of others, I think, is the only way any government or any governance system will survive. Otherwise, we go back centuries. I think what should tie governments is really the issue of rights, the issue of knowledge, because you don't really advance the world outside knowledge, and the issue also of respect for others. I think these are key. Regardless of how you call your system, I think these elements must be understood.
Finally, I'm sure our viewers would love to learn. What do you think about could be the most significant global trends for the next decade?
Well, I think the global trends are really the whole question of the connections of the world to the world by youth all over the world who are not deterred or bothered by borders, who think that they can contribute and who are active in trying to say this is where we stand on climate, on justice, on peace. And I think going forward, I can only see interconnections of youth, and they will take greater responsibility and role as we transform the world.
Thank you so much for giving us some of your time.